Hey guys, good morning. So I'm gonna try doing something new, and I'm starting with our sixth grade crew because I don't know, because I know you guys will give me honest feedback. Sorry, it's like cold in here. I like have my blanket and everything. I'm just gonna kind of make a short video, just kind of talking through some of your social studies lesson today, and my hope is that that would then be able to help you guys when you're answering your questions, and you won't necessarily have to read the whole chapter. You can just look for answers that you need, but use the video more to help you answer the questions. So the lesson today is really just talking about the transformation from Mexico in the past and to where Mexico is now. So Mexico is a lot like us. They're a federal government, and so they have a president, and they have different states, and they have local elections and those kinds of things. Mexico has 31 states. People vote and elect the leaders and all of those good things. It's broken into three different sections or different parts of government, just like ours is. So it has the legislative branch, which creates all the laws. And then it has the executive branch, which is led by the president, and carries out the laws, those kinds of things, make sure that they're happening, evaluates decision making and things like that. And then the judicial branch, which interprets the law, and decides whether the other areas are following the Constitution. And then it also has a system of checks and balances, just like our government does, to make sure that all three parts of the government are working effectively and following the Constitution. So the president traditionally has more power, especially in Mexico, but in recent years they've kind of started shifting some of that power and making it a little more fair. So for the majority of Mexico's history, their political parties were really just one-sided. So whereas we have the Democrats and the Republicans as our two major parties, they really had just one side for a large part of history. So they had a party that was called the Institutional Revolutionary Party. It's obviously a little bit different in Spanish, and so it's abbreviated to PRI. But in 1929, they kind of got control of the government. They had a PRI person elected as president, and so then what ended up happening is that every single time it was time to elect somebody new, the person in power would then kind of say I really like this person who's also in the PRI party, and I think they would be really good for the next president. And they sort of guaranteed that would happen. It was a pretty corrupt system. There was a lot of issues going on, and so they basically got to pick their successor, and they made sure it stayed in their party line so that they could keep getting what they wanted. So basically, later in the 1900s, so 1980, 1990s, people were getting frustrated. The Mexican people were like, this kind of sucks. We don't really get a choice. There's pretty much one way to vote, and that's it. And that's not right. That's not what we want. It doesn't even line up with what we want. And so President Ernesto Zedillo, Zedillo, I believe is how you say his last name. It's Zedillo. He created some different laws and reforms that allowed more fair elections and allowed other parties to really come to light. And so the National Action Party came to the forefront. They in Spanish is also worded different, so it's abbreviated to PAN. So we have the PRI, the Institutional Revolutionary Party, and then we have the PAN, the National Action Party. So those are their two main parties, and so in the next election, which was allowed to be much more fair due to the reforms that Zedillo had put in place, they actually began pushing the National Action Party, and by 2006, a National Action Party person was elected to president. So that actually ended up continuing, and many like Congress seats and things like that in our like when we think of the way our government is set up, more members of the National Action Party throughout the entire early thousands, began coming and winning those seats and getting into power. In Mexico, they're just like us, where you have to be 18 to vote. Technically, it's required that you vote, like you're supposed to vote, but it's not very well enforced. So they still have some of the issues we have with people not going out and voting, and that causing issues with who gets elected. Talked about that. So another important thing to think about when you think about Mexico is how important the history of the different cultures in Mexico is. So Mexico is a little bit like a melting pot, similar to America, where you have a lot of different cultures influencing one area. Their main like combinations, their main effect comes from the Spanish side with Mexico, but then also the Native American side, because they have huge Native American influence there, and a large population, a large portion of their population is actually mixed between Hispanic and Native American. And so they really celebrated the blend of those cultures. And so they have quite a few different like holidays and celebrations to honor that. One of those is the Dia de la Raza, which is race day in English. And it's celebrated on October 12th, and it's literally just an entire thing celebrating all the different heritages, all the different cultures that come together to make Mexico what it is. And so they do a lot of, like most of that is celebrated with art. So painters and musicians and sculptors and all of those things all come together, and they celebrate all of the different things that were brought by their heritage, the different heritages and cultures that they all have. Another huge cultural celebration in Mexico is the Day of the Dead. And the whole point of the Day of the Dead is to celebrate your ancestors. So to celebrate where you came from and the cultures that came together to bring you to where you are now. So that's also a very big, important thing in Mexico. Religion plays a role in that. So the large majority of Mexico is Catholic. And so they that tends to be very influential with the decisions that are made and the arts and the things that you would see as you were to go visit in Mexico. Another huge one is that's been growing is the Protestant church. But the majority of the religion down there does believe in Jesus and God and all of those pieces. So you see when you walk through and you look at the arts, you see a lot of influences with saints and a lot of influences with the religion playing a piece in that art there. To education, talking about education in Mexico nowadays, it used to be pretty rough. They've worked really hard to improve it. So there are a lot more schools that offer every grade level. There are a lot more schools with textbooks and even just actual school buildings now. The rural areas can still struggle a little bit. So your like farm, country areas, their schools aren't as well funded as the city areas, so they don't have quite as much as the city schools do. So a lot of farmers and a lot of people that live in rural areas will actually try to move into the cities when the schools aren't able to provide what their student needs anymore. But they are really working on that. They try to be aware of like the different cultures, especially in the rural areas. So they offer the textbooks both in Spanish and in the most common Native American language in that area. So that I think is a big thing that they're doing to try to help people. They also study English, which is a huge deal because we're going to start talking about the relationship between America and Mexico and how that affects their economy, and you'll kind of see how important that is. And so the fact that they do study English shows that that relationship is very important, and that it is something that they plan on continuing and working with. So right now, nowadays, 91% of Mexico's population above the age of 15 can read and write, which is a huge improvement from where it was. So that's awesome. So Mexico has an interesting economy. It's built a lot on trade. Back in the day, Mexico's government really controlled a lot of the industries and a lot of the economy, and so there were a lot of complicated rules, and there was just a lot of stuff that made it really hard for Mexico to have a successful economy. So they were really struggling. But then in the 1900s, they started adopting free market ideas, which gets rid of a lot of those complicated rules and really promotes the idea of competition. And so new companies were able to come in, a lot more jobs were available, and that really helped grow the economy. And then by the 1990s, Mexico, United States, and Canada all joined together in NAFTA, which is the North American Free Trade Agreement. So that helped make it a lot easier for Canada, Mexico, and America to trade. And it also made it a lot cheaper because it helped lower a lot of the taxes on those trades. So that really helped increase Mexican economy and jobs once they were able to trade more easily to America and Canada. Right now, the majority of Mexican workers work in the service industry. So that includes travel, hotels, a lot of those kinds of things, like the television industry. So those are huge sources of economic growth in Mexico. A lot of people want to travel to Mexico. It's beautiful. They like to see the cultural things that have been preserved throughout history. Some of the Native American areas that have really been preserved, they like to go see. They have a bunch of resorts down there. That's where I'm getting married. So those resorts bring in a lot of money. And then with television, they actually have a lot of Hispanic television shows that air in America, and they're very complicated storylines and very dramatic with lots of characters, and people all over the world actually really enjoy them. So that's been a huge industry for them. And then about a fourth of the workers work in factories. So producing iron and steels and cars and electronic goods and all of those things. And then only about 4% of the economy right now comes from farming. Those farmers tend to be crops like coffee and fruits, or cattle. And the farmers, unfortunately, are about the poorest people in Mexico. They're definitely among that group. And then a lot of the rest of the poor in Mexico just can't find work. And so they end up actually traveling to the United States to try to get work. And usually are able to find jobs in the southern area. And then the people that work in the U.S. pay what are called remittances. And so literally it's just a part of the money that they make that they send back to their families. And it helps Mexico's economy because then those families are still able to go to the grocery stores and pay for the things they need there, etc. And so it really helps keep things stable. So they also have a really large young population, and so they need the economy to continue to grow so that they can provide jobs for those younger workers. So we already talked about trade. But the trade is a huge, is really the biggest piece of their economy. There are ups and downs to that. the problem is that when you're so reliant on trade, the economies of the rest of the world impact you greatly, because if the rest of the world is struggling and they can't afford to come trade things with you and get the things that you have, then your economy struggles because you're not making the money. Like, and then there's competition too. Like, America can grow a lot of corn, and a lot of times we can offer it cheaper to other countries than Mexico can, so they aren't able to sell their corn, to trade their corn the same way that we are, because we can offer it at a cheaper price. So there's the competition piece too that can be a factor. They have entered into the World Trade Organization, so they are able to trade with the whole world. It's not just Canada, and America, but they are hoping to actually expand NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and they're hoping to include a lot of the Latin American zones in that, which are called, sorry, which are called the free trade area of the Americas. And so they're hoping to kind of combine those two. So, yeah, we talked about the downside. We talked about all of that. I think we pretty much got it covered. So, mostly just knowing the trade impacts on the economies, knowing the two political parties, knowing the education and the religion factors and how those are influenced with the cultural things that are so important in Mexico. So those are really kind of your key areas there, and hopefully this will help answer the questions at the end of the chapter. So I'll see you guys later. Bye.